And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Mr. President, my country participated actively in the Rome Conference, which led to the adoption of the Rome Statute of the ICC in 1998. We also signed and ratified that statute early on November 29, 2000. Mr. President, the Rome Statute was intended to help end impunity for the perpetrators of crimes listed in the statute, namely war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity, and aggression. In its preamble, the statute affirmed, and I quote, "The objectives and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, and especially that all states must refrain from the threat of force or the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any manner not in accordance with the objectives of the United Nations," end of quote. The preamble also affirmed, and I quote, "Nothing in this statute should be considered as granting a permission to any state to intervene in an armed conflict that takes place in the context of the internal affairs of any state," end quote. The Rome Statute also reaffirmed that the jurisdiction of the ICC is established only when the national judicial system fails in exercising its jurisdiction. The Rome Statute also emphasized the principal and the primary role for national jurisdiction in the establishment of justice in the territories and the cases subject to its mandate. Mr. President, I believe that the delegates who participated in the Rome Conference did not believe that what they aspired to, namely the codification of international criminal rules, will one day be used in the service of political and interventionist agendas that have nothing to do whatsoever with ending impunity. And I do not believe that these delegations at the time could have thought that the Rome Statute would one day be used as a vehicle to overthrow systems of government or to intervene in the internal affairs of state. None of the jurists who participated in drafting the Rome Statute would have thought that the question of the definition of the crime of aggression would be diluted in the service of the aggressive state, and that it would be a matter subject to interpretation according to the interests of some influential states and their followers. Nor could they have dreamt that states which carry out simultaneously all those crimes that are subject to this jurisdiction of the court would exclude themselves or would be excluded from accountability and sanctions, and that their conduct would be overlooked for considerations that are in total contradiction with the principles of justice and equality. Mr. President, it is a source for concern that some would hide behind the idea of international criminal justice in order to implement political agendas that are far removed from the internationally acknowledged and recognized legal rules and from the objectives and principles upon which the United Nations was established. It is also regrettable that some states would mention my country, Syria, in their statements, exploiting this forum and this item and this legal body in order to distort facts, in order to label distorted accusations in an attempt to exploit the law and misuse it in the service of an interventionist, crude policy in the internal affairs of other states. We would have hoped that these states which claim that they care about impunity would themselves be guided with the spirit of international criminal justice and would send an unambiguous and unequivocal message to the states and to the parties that stand behind those crimes being carried out in Syria. Mr. President, my country is confronting an unprecedented wave of premeditated terrorism and bloody violence. Everybody knows the states and the groups behind these acts. We hear their statements in the United Nations as they brag about human rights, democracy, and counterterrorism. We do not have enough time today to go over all the details of that bloody wave. The government of the Syrian Arab Republic had repeatedly explained the details of what is happening in my country, as well as the steps taken by the Syrian government to restore security, stability, and the rule of law to the troubled areas. But I reaffirm once again that in spite of all that my country has faced, the terrorism, the violence, the incitement, the public and direct incitement against Syria, the government of Syria remains serious in implementing the reforms and the serious changes in response to justified popular demands in all fields: legal, judicial, social, and political and legislative. I assure you that the Syrian authorities uphold all their legal and judicial responsibilities in order to implement the law and to hold accountable all those who have violated the law, regardless of their position or title. The Independent Judicial Commission, which has recently been established, is carrying out its activities to refer to national courts all those who have been found to have been involved in an illegal act in order to carry out the due process of law while preserving all the rights of the accused and the victims throughout all stages of trial. Mr. President, in conclusion, my country has sought since the beginning of this crisis to inform the Member States and the Secretariat of the details of the events in my country. This was carried out through more than 220 official letters which were issued as official documents of the United Nations, covering all the aspects of the crisis and the steps taken by the government, as well as the negative role adopted by some member states in order to extend the life of the crisis and to further spread destruction and terrorism in my country. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Syrian Arab Republic. We have heard the last speaker in the debate on agenda item 74. The General Assembly has thus concluded this stage of its consideration of agenda item 74.